On April 13th, 1953, a man signed a piece of paper. No press conference, no public announcement, no congressional oversight, just a signature. And with it, the United States government quietly authorized one of the most disturbing programs in its history. The man behind the signature was Allen Dulles, Director of Central Intelligence. The program he authorized was run by a chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, a man the CIA would later call their own personal Dr. Frankenstein. The program had a name, MKUltra. Its goal, on paper, was straightforward: develop the capacity to control the human mind, to find the chemical, psychological, or sensory combination that could break a person's will and rebuild it however the state saw fit. It involved the systematic use of drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and trauma on human subjects, many of them children, without their consent, without the knowledge of their families. And the scientists conducting the experiments weren't operating in the shadows of some rogue state. They were working for the most powerful government on Earth, in deliberate violation of every principle of medical ethics that had been written specifically to prevent exactly this. The program ran for 20 years. It only became public because a Senate committee in 1977 finally asked the right questions. And when they did, when the documents started surfacing, what they found wasn't an aberration. It wasn't a few rogue agents who'd gone too far. It was a system, funded, organized, and protected at the highest levels of American intelligence. The official story, the one that the Church Committee hearings in 1977 and subsequent congressional investigations established as the public record, is that MKUltra was a misguided Cold War program aimed at creating mind control techniques to counter Soviet psychological warfare capabilities. The program was terminated, the records were largely destroyed, and the public moved on. But a researcher who looks more carefully at the documented evidence, the records that survived, the testimonies of survivors, the parallel programs that have since been partially declassified, arrives at a different and far more disturbing picture. MKUltra was not primarily what it claimed to be, and the children it targeted were not chosen randomly. Before we go any further, you need to understand what they were actually looking for. Because once you do, nothing about the world you think you live in will feel quite as solid. The standard account of MKUltra focuses on its pharmacological experiments, the covert dosing of subjects with LSD and other psychoactive compounds. And these experiments did happen. But buried in the documents that survived the 1973 destruction order are references to something the official investigations largely glossed over: research into anomalous human perception. Specifically, research into children who could perceive what others could not. Children who demonstrated precognitive ability. Children who could describe locations and events at a distance without any ordinary sensory access to the information. Children whose perceptual capacities exceeded what the materialist model of consciousness could explain. The CIA was looking for psychics, not because it was credulous or scientifically naive. It was looking for psychics because it already had evidence, gathered through a parallel program with Soviet intelligence cooperation, that historians have partially reconstructed, that psychic perception was real, that it could be operationalized, and that certain individuals, and certain children in particular, possessed it to an extraordinary degree. The questions the research program was trying to answer were: why do some people have this ability? Can it be induced? Can it be enhanced? Can it be controlled? And most disturbingly, can it be obtained from subjects whose natural neurological architecture makes them particularly susceptible to contact with non-ordinary information channels? The television series Stranger Things, created by the Duffer Brothers and released in 2016, centers on a girl with telekinetic and remote perceptual abilities who was taken from her mother at birth and raised in a government laboratory where her abilities were studied, developed, and weaponized. The character's abilities include remote viewing, the capacity to enter a sensory deprivation state and project her consciousness to distant locations, accessing information unavailable through ordinary senses. And the realm she navigates when she does this, dark, mirrored, inhabited by hostile non-human intelligences, the show calls the Upside Down. The Duffer Brothers have described their research process for the show as extensive. They consulted genuinely strange sources. The show is not pure invention. It is drawing on something real. The real 11 was a child named Ingo Swann, not a girl in a laboratory, a man who worked voluntarily with the CIA's successor program to MKUltra's psychic research, a program called Project Stargate. But the essential structure of his story, gifted individual, government interest, controlled environment, weaponized ability, matches the fictional account with uncomfortable precision. Project Stargate is not a theory. It is a documented historical fact. The CIA program, which ran under various names from 1972 until its official termination in 1995, employed trained remote viewers, individuals who, in a controlled experimental setting, could accurately describe targets they had no ordinary sensory access to as an intelligence-gathering tool. The program's existence was declassified in 1995. Thousands of pages of documentation are available through the Freedom of Information Act. The results, assessed by independent statisticians, showed performance rates so far above chance, in some protocols astronomically above chance, that the conventional scientific explanation of lucky guessing is mathematically untenable. Ingo Swann, the program's most extraordinary subject, demonstrated abilities that should not exist in a purely materialist universe. He accurately described a location at a set of coordinates he had never been given any information about. He described the interior of a sealed container in a laboratory at the Stanford Research Institute. He described Soviet military installations with details subsequently confirmed by satellite intelligence. He described the rings of Jupiter before they were confirmed by the Voyager probe. And then he did something that changed the program. He remote viewed the dark side of the moon, and he reported structures there, installations, machinery, beings who seemed to become aware of his presence and to respond to it. He reported this with the calm specificity that characterized all of his sessions. And the program handlers, according to accounts from personnel who've subsequently spoken publicly, did not know what to do with it. Swann's own conclusion, which he wrote about extensively in his later years, was that remote viewing works because human consciousness is not confined to the brain or the body. It is genuinely non-local. The soul, though Swann did not use that word, preferring consciousness, can detach from its biological anchor and travel. Not metaphorically, literally. This is what the Quran says about the soul during sleep. This is what Islamic mystic tradition describes as kashf, the opening of perception to the non-physical dimension. Swann arrived at the same conclusion through experimental research. Here is where the MKUltra research, the Stargate program, and the Islamic framework of jinn contact converge at their most disturbing point. Researchers in Islamic exorcism and jinn studies, particularly scholars working in the tradition of Ruqyah, the Quranic healing framework, have documented a consistent pattern across thousands of cases. Individuals who have experienced severe trauma, particularly in childhood, show a dramatically higher incidence of jinn influence, jinn attachment, and in extreme cases, Jinn occupation. The mechanism, as understood within the Islamic framework, is this. The human soul is anchored to the physical body through a connection that, under normal conditions, is sealed and protected by the individual's fitra, their natural state, and by their spiritual practice. Severe trauma fractures this anchoring. It creates gaps. It weakens the seal. And those gaps are exactly what the shayateen exploit. The psychology literature calls the result of severe early trauma dissociative identity disorder, a condition in which the personality fractures into distinct, separately functioning parts. Islamic scholarship would recognize this description, but identify the mechanism differently. The fracture of the self creates dimensional access points that non-human intelligences can inhabit and control. MKUltra's documented methodology was built on deliberate trauma induction. The researchers used extreme stress, pain, pharmacological agents, and psychological terror, specifically because they found that traumatized subjects showed enhanced anomalous perception. They were, knowingly or unknowingly, using trauma to force open the dimensional access points that Islamic tradition warns against. And the children they preferred, the children who showed the most extraordinary anomalous perception even before the trauma protocols were applied, were the ones with naturally more open soul-body interfaces. The ones whose pineal glands were naturally more active. The ones the traditions call gifted. Gifted is one word for it. Targeted is another. This is the most difficult section of this documentary. We are going to be precise, sourced, and measured. And what we describe will still be the most disturbing thing in this film. Children disappear. This is not conspiracy. It is documented statistical reality. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in the United States, hundreds of thousands of children are reported missing every year. The vast majority are recovered quickly. Runaways, family disputes, misunderstandings, but a significant number are not recovered. And an even more significant number, researchers in child trafficking have documented, are never reported at all. The trafficking of children is real. It is a criminal industry of staggering scale. And serious investigators, not conspiracists, but law enforcement professionals, former intelligence officers, and investigative journalists have documented that at its highest levels, the trafficking network serves purposes that go beyond conventional criminality. The late researcher Dr. Malachi Martin, a former Jesuit priest with access to Vatican intelligence networks, described in his writings and interviews the existence of ceremonies at the highest levels of institutional power that involved children and that followed the structure of specific occult rituals. Rituals designed within the operational framework we have been building throughout this documentary to facilitate jinn contact and transaction. We are not sensationalizing. We are connecting documented points. The initiatory structures require increasing seriousness of commitment as the initiate rises. The historical record of what those highest levels involve has been described in confessions, in court testimony, in the writings of participants and survivors, with enough consistency across enough independent sources to constitute a pattern. The children who are most valued within this system are not chosen randomly. They are, according to multiple survivor testimonies, specifically selected for their natural perceptual gifts, their natural access to the dimensional realm, their stronger pineal function, their proximity, in the language of Islamic theology, to the jinn world. And this brings us to the question that has been implicit since part 1. If the shayateen, through their human allies, have been systematically building a global institutional network, controlling politics, controlling perception, controlling the sciences and the arts, Where is it all going? What is the destination? And what does the Quran tell us, with its extraordinary precision, about everything else we have examined, about how this ends? That will be revealed in next episode. Scientism, the Great Suppression, and the Endgame. Subscribe.